With all due respect, that's a bunch of malarkey. This is a bunch of stuff, deal.
What does that mean, a bunch of stuff?
Well, it means it's simply inaccurate.
It's Irish.
Exactly, it is. We Irish call it malarkey.
Thanks for the translation.
No,
Okay.
We Irish call it malarkey.
You know what this is? Yeah, and I reserve this word for those rare instances when it's truly deserved. This is malarkey.
That's a bunch of malarkey.
Direct from the King Spring Studios in beautiful Smyrna, Georgia. This is a bunch of malarkey. Now, here's your host, the incredible Charlie McMahon.
Thanks to radio legend Scott Shannon for that wonderful introduction. You know, folks, that introduction for me will never get old. A guy like Scott Shannon, who I grew up listening to on the radio, now the introduction voice for my podcast. So that'll never get old. And thank you all, folks, for tuning in once again to this, I guess you could say, milestone episode of A Bunch of Malarkey, our 40th episode, if you can believe that. Time does fly. We reached a record number of listeners once again last week and reached a major milestone last week, thanks to all of you, our 100,000th listener. So thank you all. We have new people joining the podcast every week. And if you are new to the show, folks, you can find us on Twitter at Malarkey Pod Show, on Facebook at just type in A Bunch of Malarkey in the search bar. And if you want to email me, I get a lot of emails about the show, about guests, about all different things. Email me at abunchofmalarkeypodshow@gmail.com. So thank you all, because like I say every week, we cannot do it without you. So, folks, we're going to do a little something different this week. We're going to do our main topic first. At the end of the show, I will announce our Mutant of the Week winner based on your votes on Facebook, and I will present this week's nominees towards the end of the show. This week's Spotlight, folks, I'm very excited about. It's my interview with Grammy Award-nominated recording artist, singer-songwriter Robbie Dupree. But first, I want to tell you why this interview meant so much to me. You know, folks, we're heading towards Memorial Day weekend in just a few days, less than a week away. They call it the unofficial start of summer. We know that, you know, from a meteorologist standpoint, summer starts on June 21st. But Memorial Day has always been the unofficial kickoff to summer. And with the kickoff to summer comes the sounds of summer. The ice cream man's bell. If you live near the beach, the crashes of the waves, and of course, those summer songs. The Friday leading into Memorial Day weekend, growing up, was as big to me as Christmas Eve. And you know how much I love Christmas Eve growing up in an Italian family. But the summer leading into Memorial Day weekend was like Christmas Part 2 for me, for many reasons. I was fortunate enough to grow up 10 minutes from the ocean and the beaches, so summer was just a lot of fun. And summer always brought with it great music. Now, in my opinion, there's two types of summer songs. The ones that talk about summer. I mean, let's be honest. Pick any Beach Boys song, a Jimmy Buffett song, songs like Summer Breeze by Seals and Croft, Brandy, You're a Fine Girl by The Looking Glass does the same thing for me. Dancing in the Street by Martha and the Vandellas. Summer in the City by The Lovin' Spoonful. Even Summertime, a 1990 huge hit by DJ Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince, otherwise known as Will Smith. You get the idea, folks. Back in the day, we made those mixed cassette tapes, mixed CDs, and now digital playlist of our summer jams. We play them when we host pool parties, those backyard barbecues, head out on boats, or whatever we do to enjoy our summer. For me, more importantly, were the songs that came out during a specific summer that immediately takes me back. It's like a time machine for me, music. I have such a connection and bond with music. It takes me back to a specific summer. I remember who I was with. What I was doing, just by hearing a particular song from a particular summer. Like I said, I was lucky enough to grow up on Long Island in New York, just near the ocean. I clearly remember the songs that defined each summer, blaring from boomboxes all along the coast of the beach, through my little Sony Walkman headphones as a kid, or blasting from a stereo at a friend's house while we were enjoying our fun in the pool or playing a wiffle ball game. Those summer songs that were released in different summers are forever synonymous with those times. Who can forget, if you're my age or a little bit older, the summer of 1982, for instance, hearing the Human League's Don't You Want Me Everywhere, Rosanna by Toto, Hurt So Good by John Cougar, who was called John Cougar at the time before he went to Mellencamp, his real name, Heat of the Moment by Asia, Eye of the Tiger by Survivor, Rocky III was big that summer, Tainted Love by Soft Cell, Only the Lonely by the Motels, and Abracadabra by the Steve Miller Band. We heard those songs on the radio and on a relatively new platform at the time called MTV, which was in its first full summer after launching August 1st of 81, the year before. The videos are ingrained in my mind as much as the songs were, or are, I should say. Well, the summer of 83, one of my favorite summers of music, where Every Breath You Take by the Police dominated the number one spot for most of the summer, while the two Flashdance soundtrack songs, What a Feeling by Irene Cara and Maniac by Michael Sambello. Then, of course, there was Electric Avenue by Eddie Grant, She's a Beauty by the Tubes, Come Dancing by the Kinks, Our House by Madness, 1999 and Little Red Corvette by Prince, Wanna Be Startin' Something by Michael Jackson, Stand Back by Stevie Nicks, and a true one-hit wonder called Too Shy by none other than Kaja Gugu. Again, songs that forever bring me back to that summer and the videos, and it just brings me back to that year, that summer of 83. But a year before MTV launched in the summer of 81, folks, there was the summer of 1980. I turned 9 that July, but had already forged a bond with music. I had a bond with music since before I even started kindergarten. My earliest memory of music, folks, was Paul McCartney and Wings and the song Band on the Run in 1974 when I was just 3 years old. You know, let's face it, when you're that young, you listen to what your parents listen to on the radio, on vinyl, on 8-tracks even, or in the family car. On any given day, well, perhaps I should say on most days, my mom entertained the entire neighborhood, as you can hear her Lafayette brand stereo 3 houses away in every direction, especially in the summer months when the windows were open. I mean, folks, who had air conditioning, central air conditioning up north in the 70s, late 70s, mid to late 70s? We had a box fan. You know, we graduated to an oscillating one. But, folks, I digress. On almost every summer day, me and my siblings, my older sister and my younger brother, were entertained by my mom. She was like our own personal DJ, you can say, blasting the Eagles, Boston, Foreigner, Kansas, Elton John, Billy Joel, and other classic rock bands and artists, along with her fair share of disco music that was also popular at the time. We could clearly hear this music as we played in the yard or enjoyed swinging for hours on our swing sets. But by 1980, my siblings and I weren't just listening to what my mom played from her stereo or in the family car, a red 1974 Dodge Dart with a black vinyl top. My sister, who was 2 years older than me, had gotten her own stereo turntable in her room, and we started accumulating our own 45 records and full albums. Every week, our grandmother would ask us what records we wanted as she headed out the door shopping. We'd hand her a small list of 2 or 3 of the hottest songs on the charts. She'd look down and read them, sometimes to herself, sometimes out loud, and just shake her head. One week she looked at us and said, "Another one bites the dust. Funky Town. Are you kids crazy? You kids don't know what real music is." And that's something I think all generations say to the next generation. But on top of those vinyl records that my grandmother would bring us every week, we had our own transistor radios where we tuned into 77 WABC in New York, where Dan Ingram would play the latest hits, or 66 WNBC, where we'd get those hits also. Then, of course, there was American Top 40 with Casey Kasem that aired every weekend. Starting in early 1980, my siblings and I never missed a countdown. It was a weekly ritual. And I'll be honest with you, folks, those countdowns are still a weekly ritual with me as I tune into them every week on satellite radio, so I still don't miss a countdown. After our weekly Saturday morning bagels and cartoons at my grandparents' house, there was American Bandstand and Soul Train. I think at that age, in 1980, I actually looked forward to Dick Clark and Don Cornelius more than I did Fred Flintstone or Scooby-Doo. We never missed those shows because we wanted to hear the hottest songs, watch the people dance, and see what the performing artists actually looked like. Again, this was a year before MTV. We had no idea what the artists looked like. But there was a show, in addition to American Bandstand and Soul Train, it was hosted also by Casey Kasem, called America's Top 10. This aired on Saturday nights on Channel 5 in New York. We watched that every week, too. Casey would count down the top 10 hits on the charts with a snippet of each video, and those videos were very primitive back in the day. They weren't those full productions that came a year or two later with MTV. Play a little snippet of each video in the top 10. He'd spotlight one of the songs and play the full video, sometimes interview the artist, and then he would also play the full video of the number one song. So we got a little taste of what was to come a year later. But it was still 1980. The first summer, I really got into baseball, started collecting baseball cards, and I vividly remember that was the summer I begged my grandfather for a bike radio. I mean, after all, how could I ride around on my bike through my neighborhood without music? So he took me to the store and got me that bike radio and mounted it to my handlebars. It was an ugly silver contraption, but it got the job done, and now I could ride around listening to those amazing songs from the summer of 80. I remember turning it on for the first time after my grandfather adjusted it to my handlebars and popped in the batteries, and the song The Rose from Bette Midler came blaring out of the tiny speaker, which was a big song that summer. The music charts from the summer of 1980 truly had something for everyone. If you wanted something funky or a bit disco-ish, you had Funky Town by Lips Incorporated and Take Your Time, Do It Right by the SOS Band. Wanted something a bit country? You had Looking for Love by Johnny Lee from the Urban Cowboy movie, or Driving My Life Away from none other than Eddie Rabbitt. If you wanted something by an established singer-songwriter, you had Little Jeannie by Elton John. It's Still Rock and Roll to Me by Long Island's own Billy Joel. You'll Accompany Me by the legendary Bob Seger, Coming Up by Paul McCartney, or Boulevard by Jackson Browne. Perhaps you wanted some Rolling Stones in the summer of 80. Well, the summer of 80 also provided that with Emotional Rescue. Something really rockin', All Night Long by Joe Walsh. Felt like some R&B? Not a problem in the summer of 1980. The Manhattans had you covered with Shining Star. Something smooth and a little bit jazzy? George Benson was ready to give you the night with Gimme the Night. Something a bit poppy? Olivia Newton-John was creating magic that summer. How about something new wave? Well, you had Cars by Gary Newman. But then, folks, there was something else. Something upbeat, smooth as hell. They called it soft rock at the time, or easy listening. But in recent years, it has become known as yacht rock. And during that summer of 1980, if the yacht was a-rockin', this 9-year-old kid... I should say, back in 1980, if the yacht was a-rockin', this 9-year-old kid was a-knockin'. From that transistor radio speaker, the smoothest sounds flowed out. Ambrosia with a song called Biggest Part of Me. Boz Scaggs with JoJo. Air Supply with All Out of Love. And two new artists that burst upon the scene. Christopher Cross with his song Sailing. And last but definitely not least, a song called Steal Away by Robbie Dupree. You couldn't go anywhere in the summer of 1980 without Steal Away blasting from a car radio or a beach boombox. Robbie would follow up Steal Away later that summer with Hot Rod Hearts. A couple of weeks ago, while out to dinner with a friend named Benji, who has appeared on the show, we discussed, Benji's a local radio guy here in Atlanta, and we discussed the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame on the show about 5 or 6 weeks ago. I was out to dinner with Benji and his wife and my wife, and I told him that as far as this podcast goes, I want to do some different things, and everybody knows how much I love music. If you said the name Charlie McMahon to all my friends, the first thing they're going to say is music, because that's my life. And my wife actually said to me the other day, don't you ever not have music on? When do you think? I go, I think music makes me think. So anyway, Benji and I were out to dinner, and I mentioned to him, I would love to get some of the artists I grew up with on the podcast. And thinking that Benji was going to look at me and say, why would an artist come on your podcast? He said to me in a very encouraging way, then reach out to them. And the first artist I thought of, the first person that came to mind was Robbie Dupree. A few days later, I reached out to Robbie, and upon receiving my request, he immediately agreed to come on the podcast. I was beyond elated, and just a couple of days ago, I had the honor of chatting with Robbie for about an hour about his career, his hit Steal Away and Hot Rod Hearts, and Brooklyn Girls, the music business in general, his recent work, and so much more. So here, for your listening pleasure, and without further ado, is my interview with the very kind and gracious Robbie Dupree. His music career is vast. Now in its sixth decade, it includes 11 albums, several chart-busting hits such as Steal Away, Hot Rod Hearts, and Brooklyn Girls, a Grammy nomination, and even a WWF anthem used by Strikeforce called Girls in Cars. His songs have appeared in several motion pictures, including Donnie Brasco, MacGruber, and I Love You, Philip Morris. His career is still going strong with the recent releases of singles like the very moving Ordinary Day, released in 2018, and the nostalgic Auto Graffiti, released just a couple of months ago. And here in 2019, Robbie Dupree is still delighting us with his musical talents, and he joins us now. Robbie, thanks so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Always good to have a fellow native New Yorker to speak with. It's true what they say, right? No matter where we go in the country, you can take us out of New York, but you can't take the New Yorker out of us, right?
That's correct.
So, the casual music fan, you're best known for your hits Steal Away and Hot Rod Hearts, obviously, but I'd like to start get a little bit of your background from the beginning. You were born and raised in Brooklyn. Was anyone in your family musically talented, singer, played an instrument? And who were your early music influences?
Well, before my time, I had a grandfather who I never knew and an uncle who were in vaudeville back in the 30s or the 20s or something.
Okay.
I never met them. They were passed before I was a kid.
Okay.
So I guess it was maybe in the DNA somewhere, but I didn't know them to be influences.
Okay.
My early influences, I mean, when you go back over all these decades and talk about influences, there are so many and they're so diverse. There was no one particular one, but there was a moment, growing up in the East New York section of Brooklyn. There were lots of street singers, groups of guys on the corner. Mm-hmm. They were older than me, but I really admired what they did and was interested in it. But I never really saw a place for myself.
Okay.
And then in 1959, I was like 11 or 12. I heard the song I Only Have Eyes for You.
Sure.
On a radio show called Jocko's Rocket Ship Show.
Okay.
It was this incredible, funky station out of New Jersey that made it all the way to Brooklyn. Anyway, that was a record that was, let's say, the first super influence that made me want to learn about making records. I didn't even know if I wanted to sing.
Right.
But I did know that record inspired me. And from there, rock and roll was building and new rock and roll was coming in. The British invasion was on the way.
Right.
And so all along, there were just so many that it's impossible to name even a few. But I did love mostly the Marvin Gayes and the Sam Cookes and the R&B side of things, Billy Soul, Motown. That was really more my thing than with the psychedelic rock period.
Right. Do you remember what your first 45 or your first album was growing up that you had, that your parents either bought for you or you bought for yourself?
Well, I do remember the first 45 I bought was Heartbreak Hotel by Elvis.
Sure.
And first album, that's a little more vague. It was probably something very much inspired by my parents' taste.
Right.
They loved the pop music of the time, and they loved sort of like the Latin jazz samba thing that was going on back then. So it could have been like a Harry Belafonte record, or it could have been Mongo Santa Maria,
Sure.
something like that, because I also became very interested in the salsa music.
Nice. So you began singing really on the street corners in Brooklyn in what you say the mid-'60s?
Well, no. Way before that.
Oh, way before that.
Kid. Yeah, I mean, by the mid-'60s, the a cappella thing was over.
Right, because of the Beatles and the British invasion.
Yeah, it had just been blown away. But when I was a kid, even though I wasn't first call or invited all the time, I used to just hang around and listen to the older guys
Sure.
sing. And then I would, sometimes by somebody didn't show up on time, they'd let me fill in for a couple of songs, and so I really wouldn't consider myself. I came along at the tail end of that.
Right.
And the guys that were 17 and 18 at that time were really the ones that were the most displaced by the new rock and roll.
Sure. So I have to ask real quick, as a kid growing up in the 50s in Brooklyn, Dodgers, Yankees, or Giants?
Dodgers.
Okay. I figured that, but I said just maybe he's a Yankees fan. My dad grew up in Manhattan. He was a baseball Giants fan. I'm a Yankee fan, so I figured you were probably a Dodgers fan. Now, when
they left, I even stopped paying attention to baseball at all.
I don't blame you.
So many people, they felt, that they'd been supporting the Dodgers for so long. And
Sure.
The Dodgers pulled out and went to California, and everybody just got really embittered.
Right.
Some people went to the Mets.
Yeah, my dad went to the Mets. You had no interest, right?
No, I think it was the first time that I realized that the world isn't fair.
Absolutely. So when did you start actually sitting down and saying, I want to write my own songs? When did that happen? At what time period?
Well, that was after I started playing music.
Right.
Just to make a bridge between the very early days and the next ensemble of music. It came when I decided that I wanted to learn how to play guitar.
Okay.
And there was a young kid in my neighborhood who was advanced, and he helped me to understand some of the basics. And from that, like so many musicians, it starts off with wanting to learn a song, and then it winds up wanting to play a party.
Sure.
It's an evolution. I didn't feel like I grew up inspired to become a musician. I felt like it was a slow process.
Okay.
And same with songwriting. It all came along when, like singing, I played guitar, and when the singer quit the band, I started to sing.
And we're thankful that you did.
and you just, terrible at first, and you fight your way along with it. And then writing came the same way. A bunch of really terrible songs, but still they were original, and it was very important at that time in the 60s to have original art. Cover bands were not what was happening.
Right.
So just the same way, out of necessity, I began writing songs, and it wasn't really until much later that endeavor became more serious. When I moved from New York, from Manhattan, I moved to Woodstock, New York in, I think it was 1970. I'm going to say 72.
Yeah, it's 72. It says on your biography.
Yeah, I think that's right. And
it was a big music scene. For those listeners that don't know, let them know, Robbie, about what the scene was in Woodstock post-festival.
Well, first, the festival didn't happen in Woodstock. That was the first.
Right. Well, yeah.
50 miles away.
Right.
But Woodstock got all of the attention because the name was used.
Right.
But there was a man named Albert Grossman who originally was in Chicago, and he had a club in Chicago called the Horn of Plenty, which was a very popular folk stop for all of the major folk artists at the time. And he signed Bob Dylan.
Right.
And he signed Janis Joplin, Paul Butterfield Blues Band, The Band, and many, many, many others. And moved to Woodstock, New York, and started Bearsville Records and Bearsville Studios. And that just changed the whole complexion and made it a place.
That was the place to be back in the early 70s.
If you were not in,
L.A.
It seemed like regional places. There was Memphis, and there was Detroit, and there was Philly. But Woodstock, certainly for a small town with only about 5,000 people, probably 10% of them had record deals, so it was quite popular. And when I came, there was still, the band was still intact, and they were here, Paul Butterfield and his band. And the record company and the studio was still thriving. Todd Rundgren was on the label. He was here. And so it was very inspiring for me just to be walking around in a little town with all these great people.
Sure.
And hearing the music in small cafes for $3, it was quite an amazing time. And I think that was really perhaps the biggest inspiration of my life, was just being thrown into the midst of all of this great music.
Sure. By 1976, you had a song called When You're Down. It got some national recognition as it won the American Songwriting Festival Award for Best R&B Song.
Right.
Is that when you started thinking about like a solo career outside of a band?
No. That was very much a band concoction. I mean, I wrote the song, but the but the track itself, was all very funky and very much the R&B trail that I had taken.
Right.
It led to actually, I think it was 1975. I'm not sure. I can't remember now, but I think it was 75. And I was just trying to build a band. I found that was, for me, that was the most important thing. I didn't feel strong enough to go as a solo artist. So in all those years in Woodstock, through 73, 4, 5, 6, 7, I was just building bands. Some of them contained the same personnel, some of the same personnel, and we changed the rhythm section or whatever. And then finally, after long work and writing lots of songs and doing things, we finally got a record deal on Mercury.
Okay.
With that band.
Oh wow.
And but by this time, it's hard to explain, but bands take a beating on each other when they don't have any money, and gigs are hard to find.
Sure.
And I think the good was out of it for all of us by the time the deal came along.
Okay. Is that why you decided to go out to L.A., 78?
Yeah, that was pretty much it. I just thought, if I sign this deal, it's going to be unhappy, and we're going to be in this place for a long time. And I think that creatively we were all going in different directions. I learned an important lesson. A band can never really be a democracy.
Right. I think the Eagles said that in one of their documentaries as well. Seems to be a popular mantra with bands.
Yeah. It's off, like, that's a great idea.
Right.
But as time goes on and people develop, their real personalities and tastes come out. So not to belabor it, but I left them with the record deal.
Right.
And I left and moved to California. And began the solo career, which really didn't include playing shows or anything. It was just about getting this group of guys who I knew out there together to do like 4 or 5 songs in the studio as masters, to create master records. And that's what happened over that period of 78 and 79.
And then you came back to New York for a short time, right? In 80?
Well, yeah, there's more of a thing in that. We finished the recording and we were really pleased with what we had, but we were not able to get a deal.
Right.
And everywhere passed on the record.
Wow.
Well, it wasn't a whole record, it was 5 songs, but everybody passed on it. And after that, I thought, I've been doing this a long time and nothing's happening.
Sure.
And this was the best shot for me. This is the one that I really felt, if this didn't make it,
right,
I'm going to give it up. And so I went back to New York, and I never really had an education specifically, so I just took a job through a friend of mine loading carpet on trucks in Long Island, and it was pretty rough time in my life. And then I'd been doing that for a few months, and then I got a phone call one night from my drummer, who was my co-producer. It was his brother who I barely knew.
Right.
And he had played a cassette in a social get-together with a man from Elektra Records. And a very coincidental moment, and the guy just loved it.
Wow.
And said, "What's this guy doing?" And he said, "I don't know, we'll have to try to find him." And they found me, and they gave me a deal. And we finished the rest of the songs for that album, and that is the short story.
That's a great story. Well, not great for the struggle that you had up until that point, but still a great story, and we're glad that they found that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, I see it a lot nowadays, young people. Now, you had already paid your dues that we just spoke about. You were in the Woodstock music scene. You went out to L.A. You came back. You were working a regular job. Now, with these shows like American Idol and The Voice, these young people thrust into the spotlight without ever having to, quote, pay their dues. Do you think that that's tough on a person? I mean, you went through all the trials and tribulations of looking for gigs and all that. Now, these young people, they just become instant stars. How tough do you think that is for them?
Well, I'm not really sure that that's, completely accurate. That's the projection that they make.
Okay.
But I tend to think that listening to these people, that they've had history.
Mm-hmm.
That they didn't just come out of this from nowhere. They're advanced, the ones that get through anyway. And I'm sure there are cases of this overnight success thing, but I imagine it's hard no matter how you do it. Whether you pay dues and get there, it's all very complicated. I don't think it's the best. Well, let me put it this way. Bob Dylan wouldn't have won The Voice.
Right, exactly. Nor would Bruce Springsteen.
Yeah, nor
one of my favorites.
Yeah, I mean, or Van Morrison,
right,
or like many of the things. It's just a different time, and individuality is not really the selling point today.
Right.
Today, a record deal is the gateway to a reality show or a sneaker company or something.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Right, right.
And there no longer exists the phrase selling out. Like when I was coming up, it was very important that all the musicians didn't sell out. You would not have seen Jimi Hendrix or suntan oil.
Right. Exactly.
And so I think that it's hand in hand with that today it's a package.
They'd put their name on a laxative today if it made money, right?
Yeah, and nobody criticizes them for it. It's just like, get it while you can.
Right.
And never used to be that way. I have a philosophy that I can't, substantiate, but I think that feeling of selling out, if you will call it that, is one of the reasons why the young public has no compunction about file sharing or taking music without paying for it, because I think they've lost respect for the artists.
You're absolutely right.
And you wouldn't have stolen a record from Bruce Springsteen or the Beatles or anybody. You wouldn't have done that,
right?
Because they maintained a higher standard, being for civil rights, being against the war in Vietnam,
right?
Whatever things you want to look at, they put it on the line,
mm-hmm.
and people appreciated them for it.
So how was Robbie? How was the transition? You know, you mentioned in 1980 when you got that call from Los Angeles, and then a few months later you're on American Bandstand. Now I'm sure you watched American Bandstand growing up in the 50s. Dick Clark took over the show in 56. What was that like? Just a few months later, being in front of Dick Clark and being interviewed and playing your Steal Away and Hot Rod Hearts on American Bandstand.
Well, you know, it's very hard to explain that situation exactly, except to say that you're right. It has this amazing thing that you grow up on a show like American Bandstand, and then one day you find yourself on it, and it feels quite surreal. You know, I mean, that's the best way I could put it. And I can tell you that I was never really comfortable with, I mean, I love playing music, I love recording and writing, I love all of that, I love my live shows, but I never really was comfortable, nor did I pursue celebrity.
Right.
And so I felt an awful lot like a tourist when that part of my career was in play and doing all of the TV shows.
Yeah, you were on all of them, Solid Gold, the Midnight Special.
Yeah. So I did it, but I was always feeling self-conscious.
Right.
You know, even at the Grammys, I found myself surrounded by Michael Jackson, Quincy Jones, and Diana Ross.
Sure.
All these people, and I just felt like, you know what? I don't really think I belong here. I really felt that way. And other people that I know that came up the way I did, they embraced it. You know, they had it in their mind. They saw themselves in that place. You know, they completely got into it. And I always thought of it as that kind of fame is a rental.
Right.
And I never really thought, I never thought I'd be still doing it even now. But nonetheless, it was thrilling and it was exciting, and there were always things that brought you back to reality. Even when you did those shows, you still had to go pay dues. There was still more dues to pay, more shows to play, breaking in. You know, you have a hit record or two, but you're not on the level of people that have had 6 and 7 and 10. Right. So you're always, you know, competing, if you will.
I'm sure.
To get ahead, you know.
Well, let's talk about 1981. It was a big transitional year for music. You're nominated for a Grammy for Best New Artist that year. You fell a little short to Christopher Cross, who also put out a fabulous album that year. That same year, your second album, Street Corner Heroes, is released, which I think could go toe-to-toe with your first album. There's so many great songs on that as well. The title track, Brooklyn Girls, All Night Long, which was your homage to the doo-wop era. I'll Be a Fool Again. I could go on and on Saturday Night. But it didn't have the commercial success in America that your first album had. Now, we all know that music changed August 1st, 81 with that rocket going off on MTV, which I have mixed emotions about, Robbie, because, you know, it went from 1980 where everything was like Forrest Gump used to say, it's like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. Kenny Rogers was on the charts, Dolly Parton, the end of the disco era. Everything was going on in 1980 on the charts. And then that rocket launches on August 1st and the music industry changes. Do you think the launch of MTV had anything to do with artists like you or Christopher Cross or Ambrosia not having the commercial success after the launch of MTV?
Well, I can't speak for anybody else, you know, because I don't know what their particular story was.
Right.
In my case, it's really very simple. I don't look for blame. You know, things come and things go.
Right.
That's the way it is. But I can tell you this, that was the year that there was a big RICO investigation into Warner Electric Asylum.
The payola.
And they pulled all the independent promotion. And when Street Corner Heroes came out, the very first debut single was Brooklyn Girls, and it immediately hit the charts and headed in New York, and it was set to go. And then probably a week later, this investigation was launched, and they pulled all the independent promotion from Weird. And I know that my record was caught in that.
Oh, wow.
That was more important. Now, can I say that if they still continued independent promotion, it would have been a big success. I can't say that. I don't know. But I know that it didn't get a chance because they pulled it. And for the people listening to your show, independent promotion, every single act that they've ever heard has used independent promotion.
Sure.
It's not necessarily always as stark as payola, but it's like taking a client out to lunch.
Right.
It has to do with, it can be as innocent as that, or giving tickets to, let's say I was on Elektra, and Queen was a giant group on Elektra.
Right.
And so sending a radio station 2 tickets to a Queen show.
Sure.
I guess it's all, illegal in some way.
Right.
But anyway, nobody wanted to deal with this investigation, and so they pulled out. The groups that had the money to stay in the game truly independently, in other words, to put their money behind the record, they didn't lose any traction.
Okay.
Because independents didn't care where the money came from.
Right.
They just wanted, the tickets, the vacations, whatever they wanted.
Sure.
So, I mean, I didn't feel like my record was any different than anybody else's. That's how everybody made it.
Right.
And all of a sudden, that vanished. So that, mixed with changing music, mixed with MTV. But see, MTV really was a rock counterculture beginning.
Right.
With the Clash and things like that.
Well, for the first year anyway, until Michael Jackson, Prince, and all that started coming on.
Right. But VH1 was for us.
Right.
And VH1 was a station for, adult contemporary pop stuff, Gloria Estefan and me and Christopher Cross and whatever. If you wanted to, so, I mean, it's true that MTV was really the powerful one, but there were venues for us. But if you didn't have the independent promotion, you weren't going to make it. And that's what happened.
And honestly, could you see yourself doing all these crazy videos and big productions? Like, you had to kind of be an actor as well as a singer and a performer back then, and to star in all these videos.
I think a lot of us looked like idiots when we did them. We all had to do some of them because nobody really knew what they were doing.
Right.
And so record companies just jump in and say, you got to make 2 videos like next weekend, and so you do these things, and they're awful and kind of embarrassing,
Yeah.
In retrospect, and you look at them and you think, what were we thinking about? I didn't have any power.
Right.
To go to the label and say, no, this is the way I want to do it.
Well, before MTV, I remember, like, the summer of 1980 especially, I remember Casey Kasem had an American Top 10 show. It used to air on Channel 5 in New York in the metro area. And they used to show videos. They used to do the Top 10 and show clips of each video, and then they would spotlight one song. And I remember seeing your video on there when I was a kid, and amongst many other artists. And that was like my first taste of music videos. That was about a year before MTV came out. And the videos were primitive. There was yours, where you're just performing stage. Gary Newman, Cars, the same thing. Billy Joel, It's Still Rock and Roll to Me. He was kind of on a sound studio stage. They weren't very high production videos until MTV came along.
And they weren't what we were prepared for.
Right.
We grew up learning the craft, of music, and then all of a sudden,
right.
you put into this in front of a camera, and they go, dance with the girl.
Yeah, okay.
Kind of embarrassing. I wound up having, at the time I was married, and I had to bring my wife to be in a video because she didn't want me dancing with some stripper that they. So yeah, it's kind of a funny thing, and that was really a change. I'll tell you, this goes a little bit forward of that. A couple of years forward, there was a famous nightclub in New York City called McKell's. It was in the southwest part of Harlem.
Okay.
And it was a really prestigious place where just about everybody performed, even though it was tiny, 100 people or something could fit in it. But from Whitney Houston, David Sanborn,
wow,
like stuff with Richard T. and Steve Gadd, like famous jazz players of all kinds and everything. Well, I got a break and I got to play. This was after Steal Away and after the golden era for me.
Okay.
And one night I met Bill Graham.
Oh, wow.
Who, for the listeners, he was the impresario, owned the Fillmore East and the Fillmore West and Winterland, and became one of the iconic concert producers for the Rolling Stones and the Eagles and everybody. So I met him, and I really wound up being an opportunity for me to ask him a lot. And one of the things I asked him was, why did you get out of the club business? And he said, because of the Woodstock Festival. And I couldn't understand what he meant. And then he broke it down, and he said, after the Woodstock Festival, that was the beginning of the corporatization of rock and roll.
Right.
And I couldn't get phone calls back from anybody because they were saying, we don't want you to play a 1,500-seat club when you could be playing a
stadium
100,000-seat festival.
Right.
And so I simply, my point is that music started to change then, 50 years ago, and the evolution of it, or the de-evolution, however you want to look at it, was that, corporate decisions, people at the record companies stopped being people who were really music people who really knew how to write music and write charts, these incredible people like Aretha and Neshri Erdogan and the people at Atlantic who signed Aretha Franklin.
Sure.
And, it was another time, and the executives had a lot more skill. And then it became another deal. Everybody went a different way, and the corporate people came in and started to make decisions that weren't based on music, but based on other things. And then today, here we are.
Right. Well, that kind of segues into what I wanted to talk about briefly. I did a show a few weeks back talking about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which my opinion now is the Music Hall of Fame because of different artists, which I have no problem with, Janet Jackson and different artists. It's all, in a way, a subgenre of rock and roll. So I have no problem with, it not being all quote-unquote rock and roll stars. But when they inducted this year's nominees, I did a whole show on that. I had a local radio guy on the show, and we talked about artists that we feel have gotten snubbed over the years that should be in, that aren't. Off the top of your head, is there someone that's... First of all, what do you think about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? And secondly, does anyone stand out in your mind that should have been in a long time ago that's still kind of waiting on the sidelines?
Well, I don't pay any attention to it, really, because I think those kind of award shows sort of have nothing to do with what I do. Mm-hmm. I'll never get one.
Right.
And it's, again, in the corporate scene, it's MTV and HBO, and HBO is owned by AT&T, and,
right.
So they make decisions not based on who should get it.
Right.
Some other criterion. I don't know what it is. So I don't pay much attention to it. I couldn't tell you who's in it or who isn't in it.
Right.
But there's one band that I think of that never really made a hit record, but they've had a 50-year career of making incredibly interesting and crazy music happen, and they're called NRBQ.
Okay.
And they are a band that everybody who knows anything about music or is a musician knows about them. See, they won't put them in because they just don't have the cachet.
Right.
And so I would say that they would be somebody I would promote if I...
Right, if you had a say in the matter.
Or if they even cared.
Right.
Themselves. I mean, they obviously didn't try to please anybody. They just did what they did. But they influenced a whole lot of people coming along.
Now, like on social media, there are a lot of different radio stations and different pages about music, and they always say post your favorite one-hit wonder of all time. And a lot of times people, and there's the grammar police on social media, people that will correct grammar. I'm the music police when I see an article. Now, about 10 years ago, Robbie, VH1 did a one-hit wonders of the 80s countdown, and they put your song "Steal Away" at number 63. I wanted to jump, and it wasn't even my song; it's your song. I wanted to jump through the screen and strangle somebody. How could I could see a guy on Facebook trolling around saying "Steal Away" doesn't know anything about music, but how could VH1, a big music outfit like that, think that Robbie Dupree's a one-hit wonder? How does that slip through the cracks?
Well, I can answer you that question very specifically. About that time, I got a call from a producer at VH1.
Okay.
Who asked me, would you like to be on a feature, one-hit wonders? And I kind of bristled a little bit, and I went, well, I had 2 hits. And he said, Robbie, there are no shows for 2-hit wonders. I said, okay, I'll do it.
Point taken.
Yeah, so I think, again, it's just, there's so much bullshit that goes on.
Right.
It's just about, like, the fact that you're mentioned, if that makes any difference, if it raises your profile or whatever you want to call it, you can't take it seriously.
Right.
You can't argue these points with people like that because they're not there for accuracy's sake.
I don't know. You're a better man than me, Robbie. I mean, I wrote a book last year, and I plan on writing a couple of others. But if someone, after I wrote 5 books, said, here's Charlie McMahon, he wrote 1 book, I'd be pretty pissed off.
Well, I mean, there's nothing, what can I say to that?
No, I know.
Like, you have to get into it when something really matters to you deeply, then you fight.
Right.
This was not, for me, it's like,
pick your battle.
They're just looking for stuff to put on the show, and they don't care,
Right.
One way or the other. You could say no,
Sure.
I could say, no, I don't want to do the show, and then it's done. There's nobody forcing me to do it. I would, it's just how they come up with, like, why was I number 64?
Yeah, just indiscriminately.
And when you think about it, I mean, this is a funny thing. I mean, it has everything to do with the fan base, but those songs came out in 1980. Mm-hmm. That's 39 years ago.
Right.
And
the person who's making that countdown up is 25.
Yes, Steal Away never left the radio.
Right, and that too.
And I mean, in other words, in terms of its impact for me, for my whole life, for these last 4 decades, it's been, paying royalties.
Sure.
And substantial, getting in movies, mm-hmm. television shows. We just now we're in the final episode of Better Call Saul.
Right.
Orange is the New Black.
Mm-hmm.
And, so it's still, it's become, iconic in that world.
Now, I'm sorry, go ahead, Rob.
Just to say that I'll bet that there are many songs above me in that list, 63 to number 1, mm-hmm. that don't have that same longevity.
I agree.
I don't know what they are, but whatever the songs are, you can't tell. So what argument can you base on it? Who made more money? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah. You seem to embrace the term yacht rock. I know I've read a lot of articles where artists that are in that genre don't embrace it necessarily as much as you do. I know a few big artists that embrace the term. You've toured with Yacht Rock Review. I saw you here last summer, and it was an excellent show. Anybody who is into this genre of music, or even if you're not familiar with yacht rock music, definitely go check it out if they come to your town. Now, explain, because a lot of times, Robbie, people say, what kind of music do you listen to? And I love all kinds of music, but I'll mention yacht rock, and people will look at me strange. If you had to describe yacht rock to the listeners, how would you describe it?
I would say it's what the young people call soft rock.
Mm-hmm.
That's all.
Okay.
It's nothing different. It's they probably felt more comfortable. They meaning the young public, the 30 and under public that have embraced this music.
Right.
They probably felt more comfortable defining the title of it than they would feel calling it, like, what was it called before? Like
Easy listening, soft rock.
It wasn't like it had a great name.
Right.
If anything, there was no humor in those names at all. And I think that if you're overly serious about whatever they call the kind of music,
Right.
Fans that have been around for a long time realize that just the term rock and roll, I mean, is rock and roll Bill Haley?
Right.
Or is it Rolling Stones? Or is it the Allman Brothers? Or is it...
Sure.
So, I mean, everything evolves. And whether the names change or not, we've been lucky that somehow that the music from, like, let's say 76 to 82 or 83 has fallen into this category and been adopted by people. And I mean, if you went to, like, a show in Atlanta, I'll bet there must have been 3,000 people there.
It was packed. It was standing room only.
Were you at the...
I was at the Review last year at Chastain Parkway. You performed?
Yeah.
It was
Yeah, those things, that was 6,200 people.
Yeah. And I saw them at the Tabernacle, which is a smaller venue the year before. And let me tell you,
I was there too.
Yeah, and like you said, it's people. I see 16-year-old girls and guys singing these songs from 76 to 81, 82 era. It's not just for the people my age or your age. People connect with this music.
It's actually not. I mean, an example of, I don't go out and do shows where I'll call them oldie shows. I don't do them.
Right.
I still include my hit songs in my show in the encore as a respect for the audience that brought them and brought me there. But the long story short is, if you go to a show with any one of the original acts on it, you'll see a whole different crowd. No young people.
Okay.
All older people. 45 to 70.
With their captain's hats on.
And if you go to a Yacht Rock show, it's the complete antithesis, where they're all young, college age, etc. So I think we really wound up having an opportunity to have two audiences.
Absolutely. If
you choose to continue to play those songs exclusively, like you mentioned Ambrosia. Well, Ambrosia really, they play their hits and a few other things, and that's the show they do.
Right.
You know what I mean? I don't know if they're writing anymore or recording records. I don't really know. But I've gone a different way, and I've made, 10 albums since the old days. So I've always just realized that I'm never going to return to that rarefied status again.
Sure.
But the music has to still be good, or I wouldn't do it.
Well, and that's what I want to talk about. I want to talk about your most recent stuff. But before we do that, I just want to say, I was saying to my wife last night, if I do ever own a yacht, the first song I'm playing on that yacht is Nobody Else off your first album. That song has like a love boat, party boat type of feeling. That's the first song if I ever get a yacht.
All right. I'll hope for you.
All right, so let's talk about a couple of your most recent singles. First, Ordinary Day, which was released last year. Tell our listeners what the song is about and what inspired you to write the song. I know you mentioned in the song you touch on poverty, economic divide in the country, gun violence. What inspired you? Were you watching the news one night, or was it just a culmination of everything going on?
Yeah, it's just life. It's just being alive today and trying to communicate something that doesn't beat people over the head. It's not one of those songs that has to, it's couched in a very simple arrangement of music, and it's more poetic than getting hammered by somebody screaming about the same issues.
Sure.
So I just try to tell things that matter. I mean, when you get older and you've been around for a long time and you make music, you have to find things that matter to you to sing about. Things I sang about when I was 25 aren't things that I can sing about all these years later.
Sure.
So you're looking for whatever contemporary feelings that you have that you can share with people and that you can, I guess I put it this way. When you're young, you're a leading man. Mm-hmm. When you're older, you become a character actor.
Okay.
And that's kind of the role. And you can't write silly songs about, all the girls who are in love with you or something. You have to grow up with it, and it's just a grown-up view of what we're seeing on the streets every day.
Sure.
And on the TV every night. And I think it was successful in conveying my feeling and also having really good quality music.
Absolutely. And for the listeners, if you haven't heard of Ordinary Day or haven't heard the song yet, definitely check it out. It's available on all the streaming services. Definitely give it a shot, especially in today's climate, what's going on now. Do you feel music itself is less political or less social issue oriented today compared to the 60s and 70s because artists can reach their fans direct via social media to express their views?
I really don't know. I mean, I think, it seemed like in the early days of urban music, it really was a profound statement, right up through early rap music. Whether you enjoyed it or not, it was talking about things that were going on. It was the story of the urban life.
Right.
A lot of people didn't like it because it talked about police brutality and, homelessness and drugs and, all of that. So a lot of people were not used to that particular look at it.
Right.
And so it was featured in a different light. I think now it's just like all the music, it's all been co-opted into just being popular.
Right.
And so when you see things that come out now, it's like bubblegum hip hop.
Absolutely.
It's not really supposed to be about anything much, And I think that we're just in that age, that time where significance, integrity are all not happening like they used to be a long time ago.
Right.
Like we talked about earlier.
Absolutely.
It's just very different. It was the keystone of art was what you were talking about. And if you look at any of the famous groups that we talk about, they all had songs that had power.
Right.
In the real power. And when they look for a song to tell one of those stories, they always go back to the artists who wrote those kind of songs. How many times have you heard the song For What It's Worth by the Buffalo Springfield in a movie to exemplify not just a period, but a struggle?
Absolutely.
And all of that, So that's not what's selling now. It's a different...
Unfortunately, because we could use those voices now.
Would you say that again?
I said, unfortunately, because we can use those voices right about now.
Without a doubt. I mean, that's the thing. And so in my own small way, I just wanted to, stand up and raise my hand and say, this is how I feel, this is what I see. And the key thing about Ordinary Day is it just says, there's a choice. You can look away and treat it just like it's just another ordinary day.
Right.
We become so desensitized.
Absolutely.
School shootings and stepping over homeless people. And, it's just like a long time ago that would have brought the house down.
Not anymore.
Today, yeah, it's just like, it's amazing. I never thought I'd live to see it happen.
You and me both. Well, what I like about you, in addition to your music, obviously, you're very vocal on social media about current events, about the current administration and other political issues. But I have to ask you, is there, I mean, I'm just a regular, ordinary guy, and on my private, personal Facebook page, I get blowback about my political views. As a singer, a songwriter, a celebrity, if you will, is there a fine line to walk these days as an artist when it comes to like stating your opinions on social media? And what kind of feedback have you gotten from fans, both that agree and disagree with your viewpoints?
Well, I don't care.
Neither do I.
Like, I'm a veteran. I went in the service in 1965. I don't have to prove my patriotism. I really don't care what anybody says.
Right.
The thing is, I exercise my right to speak, and if I was on the fence about an idea, I wouldn't bring it up.
Right. You have to be passionate about it.
But when I'm certain, when it's wrong, and when I can feel it's wrong, I'm going to talk about it. And if anybody trolls me and says, one thing or another, I don't really care. That's not going to affect me. They're not really fans or friends. They're just, people who are saying what they want to say.
They had to stir the pot.
Yeah, and it's just, they are the swamp.
Yes, indeed.
And I just look at it that way. Again, you can pick your fights, but you don't want to pick every single fight with some numbskull from Alabama.
Right.
Just keep on doing what you do. And if anybody is moved by it, or if it helps anybody to have any more courage, or if you have an idea and it helps somebody to realize that they have to get out and vote, I'm all about just get out and vote.
Right.
You don't have to vote for my guy, but you got to
have your voice heard. Yeah.
Yeah. And so my feeling is, I think that maybe in my whole life or career, maybe I've said a few things that people were motivated by or enjoyed hearing, or maybe they just thought that if he could put his career up on the line, I can certainly go vote.
Right.
Anonymously, and no one will ever know that I even did it.
Sure.
But if he's going to stand up, a lot of people don't do it because they're afraid it's going to hurt their record sales.
Right.
Honestly, I don't care.
Like what happened with the Dixie Chicks 10, 12 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that kind of thing can happen, but either you're prepared
right
for that, or you're going to, at what point, there's that saying, I don't remember the whole thing, but it says first they came for this one, and I didn't say anything, and and then finally
they came for you.
For me, and then nobody left.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I feel we're at that place now.
I agree, and I love these people who say that know nothing, that just come on social media and there'll be an article about Bruce Springsteen. Oh, he's gotten too political for me. Bruce Springsteen's been political for 45 years. Where you been? I mean,
what they want to do is they just don't want. They don't want what we're selling.
Right.
They want Bruce Springsteen for a Jeep,
Right.
And they want him riding in a Jeep, singing, Born to Run or something.
Right.
But he's not going to do that,
No, he's not.
He's one of the people that has maintained that integrity, and when he talks, he understands that people at the record company put their hands over their ears and say, "Oh, I wish you wouldn't talk."
Exactly.
But you're not gonna talk him out of it.
And let's touch on your most recent single. Came out, I think, 2 months ago in March, called Audio Graffiti, which I happen to love also. It's a tribute, basically, I'll let you tell everybody what it is, and tell us the inspiration behind Audio Graffiti.
Well, again, a long story, but made short, is I wanted to write a song that was an observation about the discussions that I hear going on all the time with music fans and with musicians, songwriters, about how the business has changed and how, today it's not as good as yesterday and all of that.
Right.
So Audio Graffiti, it really doesn't incriminate anybody. Mm-hmm. It just reminds people that once there was a time when there was Miles Davis and John Coltrane and Aretha Franklin and Marvin Gaye and so on and so forth.
James Brown.
James Brown. That was just the normal run on the radio every day. And now, one of the lines in the song talks about it and says, it's sort of now it's jazz on a cruise to Cozumel.
Yes.
And good for everybody that's on a cruise to Cozumel. I mean, don't think that that's, where you would have found Sonny Rollins.
No.
or Ornette Coleman or anything, So every aspect. So the song really, it just points out some of the feelings that I hear in the conversations that I hear, around me. It's a big dialogue now, and I think that it was important for me to say something about it and to make a video about it. It's a nice little video.
Yeah, it is.
And it's not a hip video. It's just, it tells the story along with it. So just like Ordinary Day, if anybody's interested in checking out the music, you can get either one of them on iTunes and all of the streaming sites, and also the Audio Graffiti video is on YouTube.
Yep.
And it's worth checking it out.
Absolutely.
And I'm just happy that you had this opportunity for me to talk to everybody on the radio, and it's a great thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Real quickly before I let you go, in 1958, Danny and the Juniors, they had a big hit called Rock and Roll is Here to Stay, It Will Never Die. Is rock and roll dead?
Well, again, which rock and roll? Rock and roll that we're talking about with Danny and the Juniors and Buddy Holly and everything, the Big Bopper and Chuck Berry. Yeah, that's dead. And like it died a natural death.
Right.
And I don't really know if there is any rock and roll anymore in the sense of what we knew.
How we knew it.
Yeah, there's all derivatives now, this kind of metal and that kind of metal and things, they're all very, very specific. And I preferred, let me close with this. One of the things I thought was the greatest time in life was when the most diverse top 100 existed. That you could find Jimi Hendrix next to Wayne Newton, next to Leslie Gore and the Beatles and James Brown. It was interracial. It was unsegregated. And the kind of shows that were put on were variety shows with many different kinds of acts together. And it educated the audience to better music. You might have went to see Joni Mitchell, but at that show you also saw Chick Corea. And so there were entrepreneurs that were really doing great things with music. And I think that what killed rock and roll was the compartmentalizing of it all over again. After all of the racial barriers have been broken, now all of a sudden there's a new format called urban. And it's back to race records again. Where they won't play your record on the station because why? Because it's urban. See, so we all lose, the sophisticated fans who knew a lot about music and who played on the records and where they were recorded. They were educated in a great way, and like us, they became fans then and remain fans today and would be hungry for great things to come along again. But we'll have to see if they can ever squeak through. And I want to say one other thing. I want to apologize. I've had a terrible sore throat, and I sound really raspy, and I apologize for that, but thanks for putting up with it.
Well, I think you sounded great, and I know the listeners, Robbie, will appreciate this interview. And folks, if you want to know more about Robbie Dupree, go to RobbieDupree.com. That's his website. You'll learn about him, some things maybe we didn't touch in the interview, about his upcoming tour dates and things like that. And of course, his music is available on all the major streaming sites. And if you don't know much about about Robbie Dupree, you're a kind of a youngster listening to the podcast, check him out. It'll be well worth it. It's perfect. The summer's coming. It's time to open up those windows and let the music air out. And Robbie Dupree is a great artist to do that. So, Robbie, thank you so much for spending the time with me and with the listeners today.
We'll talk again, I hope.
I sure hope so. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure and an honor.
All right, brother. Take care.
Take care of yourself.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks again to Robbie Dupree for the time he spent with me. As you can see, there's a lot more to Robbie Dupree than just Steal Away and Hot Rod Hearts. His biggest hits, definitely check out his most recent songs, Ordinary Day and Audio Graffiti. You'll be glad you did. And by all means, check out his entire self-titled debut album, Robbie Dupree, which is excellent from front to back, and his follow-up album, Street Corner Heroes. It's available on all major streaming services, or if you have an Echo device, which I use all the time, just tell Alexa to play songs by Robbie Dupree. She'll shuffle them. Or just tell her to play the album Robbie Dupree by Robbie Dupree, and she'll play the entire album for you. But again, it is available on most streaming services. So thank you, Robbie Dupree. It was an absolute honor going back in time and learning different things about you and about the music business that I didn't know, and I'm sure the listeners are grateful as well. So that was really a lot of fun, and I'm glad I could share that with all of you. So to close out the show, a little bit different from what we normally do, we are going to transition into the segment you all love.
Mutant of the Week.
So last week we had a battle between the John Deere drunk, the guy who crashed his ride-on mower into a police car while drunk and with a suspended license from 1978. He beat the wanted wig wacko, the guy who tried to evade police by wearing a blonde wig and taking off on a bicycle, and the margin of victory, 58 to 42%. So thank you all who voted. Our Mutant of the Week poll goes up on Tuesdays and ends somewhere midday on Saturday. So you have almost 5 full days to vote on that. So again, if you don't know where to vote, it's on our Facebook page, A Bunch of Malarkey. Make sure you go to the page, like the page, give us a review, and make sure you vote. Polls go up on Tuesday and end on Saturday. So here are this week's nominees. We have to go, the first one, we're going to go up to West Newton, Pennsylvania. A Western Pennsylvania woman allegedly attacked her boyfriend with a box cutter because no one got her a card, cake, or a gift on her 55th birthday. Georgia Zawacki is charged with aggravated assault, making terroristic threats, and other counts. It wasn't known Friday if she retained an attorney. Authorities say Zawacki had been drinking vodka all day long on Wednesday. Her boyfriend took her out to dinner that night, but he said she attacked him when they returned home, putting a box cutter near his throat and threatening to kill him because there was no cake and no presents. She then allegedly slashed his arm with the weapon, causing minor injuries. The man said Zawacki then ransacked his bedroom looking for gifts before leaving their home on foot. Police found her on a nearby neighbor's porch. So let's call her the Cakeless Cutter out of West Newton, Pennsylvania. Now, we've all been disappointed on a birthday here or there, but to take it to an extreme with a box cutter at 55 years old, it wasn't like a milestone birthday. See, if it was her 50th, maybe not the box cutter, but I could see her getting angry. But 55th isn't really a big... But maybe it's what I talked about a couple of weeks ago. We've gone to the expectation of everything being over the top and celebratory. So maybe now people just, on a weird numbered birthday, expect the pomp and circumstance of a milestone birthday. So we don't know what was going through her head, but the Cakeless Cutter is our first nominee nonetheless. Our second nominee comes from where else, folks? Florida. Air Jordan is ready for the draft. A Florida man arrested for shooting hoops naked in a public park told the cops he plays in the nude because playing naked enhances his skill level. Jordan Anderson, 29, was arrested for indecent exposure while playing basketball by himself on Monday, according to a Longwood, Florida police report. A park employee called 911 when they saw the 5'6", 220-pound Anderson working on his game, au naturel. I observed the white male, who was later identified as Jordan, Anderson on the basketball court of the park without wearing any clothing on his body, the arresting officer wrote in his report. When he asked the suspect why he wasn't wearing clothes, the man offered a bizarre explanation. Anderson complied when asked to put his clothes on, but was taken into custody anyway. Based on observing Jordan at Candyland Park, which is a public area exposing his sexual organs, I found probable cause to charge Jordan with indecent exposure, the officer stated. Anderson did not have any medical concerns or special hazards that needed attention, the officer wrote, adding the incident didn't appear to be drug or alcohol related. The weather in Longwood saw a high of 83 degrees and a low of 71, according to weather.com, because the temperature always matters when you're playing basketball nude, folks. So let's call him Air Johnson. So we got a nude basketball player at a park in Florida. We'll call him Air Johnson, and he's taking on the cakeless Cutter. So that's going to wrap it up for this week. I want to thank, again, Robbie Dupree for joining me. I want to thank all of our listeners for just making this podcast fun. 100,000 listeners, milestone, 40 episodes, and still a lot more to come. So, folks, whether you're listening to a Robbie Dupree record, driving around listening to those summer songs, we got summer coming up in a week, unofficial start of summer, you still have to beware. And why is that, folks? Because it's a shit show out there. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been a bunch of malarkey. Talk to you next week, folks. Take care.